started, just so we start on time. Hello, everybody. Thank you for joining us today. My name is Ruby Koch-Feinberg. I am the Agriculture and Food Systems Coordinator at Cornell Cooperative Extension, Putnam County. I wanted to give a little bit of an introduction about Cooperative Extension, Putnam County. For those of you who are joining but are not familiar with our organization, and Jen has this great slide that has a little bit of information on it as well. Our Cornell Cooperative Extension puts knowledge to work in pursuit of economic vitality, ecological sustainability, and social well-being. Our main areas of focus are agriculture and food systems, 4-H youth development, which some of you might be familiar with, and then environmental, horticulture, and natural resources, which is in Jen's world. We are really excited to offer this winter farming workshop series. This is our second session. Last week we had growing small fruits, and next week presentation is on the 18th, same time, same place, on beginning sheep and goats. And I'm certainly happy to share that link with anybody who's interested. I'll probably put it in the chat box. Sorry, I'm also welcoming more folks to the group. During the session, seems like most everybody has Zoom figured out, but please keep yourself on mute and feel free to put any questions that you have in the chat box as they come up, so we can either answer them when it's appropriate or answer at the end. We have about 15 minutes saved at the end for any questions you might have. And I also wanted to send out a little pre-presentation survey just so we could get some information. So if you could take 2 seconds and fill that out, that would be great. And then also, if you haven't already thrown in the chat box, we're just learning what you all want to learn more about today. So if you just want to throw that in, that would be great. So we can either try to cover it, talk more about it, just get to know your interests. Give you all a little bit more time on that. I say, Jen, take it away.
Okay, great. Sorry, I forgot I was politely muted. So welcome, everybody. Let's see if I can, give me a second here because it wants me to use this little button. So welcome to this agroforestry exploration. You have both myself, my name is Jen Lerner, and Jessica Alba with you today, as well as Ruby. Jess is from the Watershed Ag Council, and we'll talk to Jess a little bit later. And I am with Cornell Cooperative Extension, as Ruby mentioned. Today, we want to just kind of look at this, and you'll see 2 words up there, forest farming and agroforestry. And there are some differences. And again, you'll hear many shades of this meaning, but I defer to the USDA definition of those. So basically, agroforestry is the intentional integration of trees and shrubs into or existing animal or crop systems. Whereas forest farming is sometimes defined as the cultivation of high value crops under the protection of managed tree canopy. So you can think of one as like you've got farming and you've got a farm land and you're going to intentionally introduce tree and woody shrub and tree crops into that system, versus forest farming where you have this existing canopy and you're managing that canopy to farm underneath it. With that in mind, and you think about where we are here in the Hudson Valley, and you look around in the lower Hudson Valley, we are mostly trees. And we're in Putnam County here, and I'm not sure where all of you are visiting from, but here in the lower Hudson Valley, we're heavily treed. We've got wonderful forests of primarily oak woodlands in Putnam. So if you think about that as your canopy, we're going to be talking about mostly the things that we cultivate beneath that canopy of mature trees. And there's so many details we could go into today, but because this is really just a quick, brief overview to kind of whet your appetite and get you thinking about agroforestry, we're not going to get into the details, but hopefully we'll give you lots of resources that you can go check out for yourself as well. So why farm the woods? The woodland that we have is really a unique environment of shade and humidity, there's an ability to create a diverse and resilient farming system because of that unique environment. For farm diversification, it offers you opportunity to grow some higher value crops, and then hopefully, we started talking earlier, hopefully find a market for them or get them processed in a way that they can be sold. And depending on your philosophy or your interest, this could be integrated with a local ecosystem, and you can affect some really awesome ecosystem benefits by doing this as well, depending on your crop and how you use the land. But as with all things, it's really important to start with assessing your own goals. Like, what do you want to achieve by doing this? What time do you have? So constraints are really important to think about too. What time do you have? Energy do you have? I really enjoy shiitake mushroom cultivation because I don't have a lot of time and I can mostly get away with it without putting a lot of regular hours in it. It's not that it's set it and forget it, but you can fit everything else in between there. So sometimes it's what time you have, and what are your assets? What is your land like? What is the land you have best suited to growing? So it is important to take the time to plan and then inventory the assets that you have. Some important things, we already talked about the trees, but you should also inventory the native plants that you have potentially already in there. Unfortunately, here in the Lower Hudson Valley, we have such high deer populations that there's often not a lot of our native plants left. Certainly the canopy has allowed for some shade. That's one of the things you may want a lot of or a little of. So, where do you have more shade? Where do you have less shade? Running water is usually a really big one, no matter what the cultivation is. And then sometimes electricity is a really good thing too. If you're inoculating shiitake logs and you don't want to move them very far, where is your nearest electricity point? So you can also think of those things, as a limitation too. Where is that water, or too much water? You may need fencing for multiple reasons, depending on the crop that you're thinking of. So that really adds to the cost of the operation. Certainly here in the Hudson Valley, deer are a big issue with shiitake crops. At least they'll come on in and nibble everything. So our shiitake laying yard is fenced, but things that can climb over fences can also find their way, or under fences or through fences can also find their way to your shiitakes. Again, time and money always with everything we do. And then unfortunately, poaching is also an issue as well, where people discover that you've got a crop out in the woods and find a way to help themselves to it. And just a caveat, and I've mentioned it a couple of times, because wherever there's a growing thing, there is some other growing thing that wants to eat it. And a lot of times your job in cultivation is to protect it long enough so that you can at least get a crop out of it. So, it's everything, deer, birds, coyotes, slugs, raccoons. I have a perennial issue with chipmunks, and birds. For those of you who are thinking of shiitake, sometimes the birds will peck all the inoculant out of the holes that you painstakingly put them in. So they're all looking for a way to eat it. You have to decide what your threshold is to take action, and it's different for every crop. So the ginseng we were talking about earlier, slugs can be a real problem with those seedlings getting started. So, okay. Then today, we just want to kind of look at forest crops as a whole. We're not going to go into timber forest products. We're going to just look at the non-timber forest products. Firewood and saw timber, that's a whole different discussion and for another time. So you've heard probably of log-grown shiitake cultivation. I certainly talked about it a little bit as we've started here, but there's a lot of information about this out there, both on social media, on the internet, and there's some great books about this as well. In our area, it's kind of a natural because we have so much oak, maple, beech, and a very few other species are the tree species that these mushrooms will grow on best. They are inoculated into pre-cut logs, and we'll have a whole presentation on this coming up in March in person, and we'll do some inoculation together if you're interested, but more on that later. But this is really a pretty reliable and manageable thing. So for my busy schedule, this is something that I can do because I can squeeze in a couple of days here and there where I have the really high intensity work to do. And but the rest of the time, the logs are either resting or soaking or whatever they're doing, but it's not a high intensity unless you're doing it in large scale. So a lot of people are attracted to doing log-grown shiitake. But again, here is this product that you bring to market. You've got to have somewhere to sell it and some way to sell it. So that's really an important part to think before you engage in any project to grow something, is how you're going to get rid of it on the other end. We did have in our area, we've had shiitake CSAs. We've got folks drying them, folks working with farmers to sell them at their existing farm stands. So think about this before you get into it, unless you really like to eat shiitakes, because when you get a lot, when they all flush, you get a lot of mushrooms. So, and there's ways to manage that as well. But there are other mushrooms as well. And again, it depends upon how you're going to sell them. How are you going to move them through this supply chain from you growing them, which to me is always the most exciting part, to finding a market, which is the harder part, right? So there's other mushrooms that are pretty reliable, like lion's mane is one that can be grown fairly reliably on either totems or I think I have this in the next slide, or stumps, where you've cut other things down. You can also inoculate the stumps, and also for indoors, you can also do a sawdust culture of this as well, so that in more controlled environment. But again, we're talking about farming the woods here, working in the forest, so we're sort of keeping ourselves just to the wood related products. So totems, meaning you basically inoculate on and stack into a tall pole, not too tall or it falls over, but that's okay. Or you inoculate an existing stump and it will grow out of it. Stropharia is another mushroom that can be grown on hardwood sawdust or wood chips. It can be grown in the garden where you're going to grow, say, a perennial crop. You could do it around a perennial crop. You want to put it somewhere where you're not going to be messing around in it. You got to give it time to grow. And it's a really tasty mushroom, a little larger, spongier kind of mushroom than shiitake. And if you think that you perhaps would be growing something like bramble crops, berries, there again, that's a perennial crop. You could potentially grow this along the base of that, someplace where you're not going to disturb it regularly. And it's a layering kind of lasagna effect where you start with bare earth and you add sawdust and you purchase the spawn, add that in, and then cover it with wood chips and sawdust, or wood chips or straw, and then let it grow. But with all mushroom crops, it's really important to make sure you can identify what you are eating. As they say, if in doubt, throw it out. With shiitake, one of the reasons I like it so much is, like, I know that I inoculated that log, it's in good condition. What's coming out of those holes or the end is exactly what I put into it. But it's really important, again, with all of these, to make sure that you can identify the mushrooms that you know that you are growing. But there's so many other forest floor products that you can grow as well, including ginseng. A lot of questions at the beginning about ginseng. Just want to check and see if there's any more. Okay. Ooh, yep, we should talk about that. Ginseng is a crop that is unfortunately more likely to be poached because of its value. So one of the things about siting it, somebody asked earlier, is not only do you have to find the right conditions, but you also have to find a place that you can get to, or nobody else can get to. So you can think about it in a lot of different ways. You do want to consider the soil. So there are some methods for trying out different areas in your forested woodland to see which works better. And the amount of light or shade is important as well. Again, you might need some protection from nibbly critters, especially slugs. And unfortunately, poaching is an issue. Proximity to water is always great if you are having, depending on what kind of culture that you are doing. And let's just take a look at the ginseng. I mean, it is a valuable crop and it's seen as a medicinal. Depending on what people are really looking for is these root systems that are very gnarly and long and aged and almost human-like in their appearance sometimes. And there's a couple of different ways to grow it. There's wild simulated, where you're really just kind of growing it in your existing woodland, but you really have planted it. You're creating an area where you're planting it, or woods grown, where you've got a protected bed and you're growing it in the woods under the canopy. There's also intensive growing too, where they're doing it under shade canopies and fields. But there's a lot of value placed on having a plant that's grown slowly in the woods with all of the stresses that entails. But again, here's a crop that is going to grow over multiple years. There's all those opportunities for things to happen along the way that you got to try to anticipate and not be too disappointed in if it happens. It's a crop that does take a while to come to maturity. There's great books about all these, so we're just giving a light dusting to everything. We could go into each of these things. We won't, right? Ruby will just keep, okay, go. Okay. Just to think about some additional crops as well. There are so many other plants that are both either medicinal or ornamental that can be grown in the shade. And one of the things that got me into growing these plants is that I really hate working in the sun. I mean, I really don't like to be hot. So one of my favorite places to work is in the shade. So things like mayapple, jack in the pulpit, even ferns and hostas. If you are thinking of growing ornamentals, these are some plants. Again, many of these may need protection from nibbly critters who want to get to it. There are so many, and some really wonderful native plants like black cohosh or blue cohosh. And depending on what you want to grow, what you're interested in, and again, I'll come back to it. What's your market? Who's going to buy them after you grow them? What's the way you're going to make your money back on the hard labor that you've put into cultivating them in the woods? We didn't really go into what each crop needs because we don't have enough time to talk about the individual conditions that they need in a presentation this short. But that is something that, as you would approach any other thing, be informed, any other crop, you want to be informed and educate yourself first. But then there's also trial and error. You might think you've got everything right, but you also then might just want to try it out. And there's an interesting article that Bob Bafus, who's a ginseng grower, put out about, like, here's where you want to grow them. Well, try them in a couple of different places within this growing area, see where they do the best. And maybe that's where you're going to focus your energy and time on it and chalk those other ones up to exploration. You're trying to figure out what grows well. That does mean extra money and extra time, but in the long run, it might be wise to try a crop in several different places on your property where it looks like it's going to be right, the soil seems right, but it just does better in one place than it does in another. I also want to just add to that, with some of these plants, those are either endangered or at risk, should not be wild collected. And there are sources that you can get even ginseng seed from. Forest cultivation of these plants even can help reduce the collection pressure on native wild populations as well. So when you're looking for markets, it's an opportunity to educate your customer that this is a plant that was grown in a wild simulated situation. So it has much of the same stresses and character that perhaps the plant that was grown in the wild is, but it's not putting pressure on those endangered species because you have grown it in this environment with the intent to sell it. So, but again, don't be collecting. There's rules about collecting wild plants, even ginseng. So it's something to investigate. If you're interested in that, we can both myself or Jessica can turn you on to some web pages that go through the steps to become to collect and to sell. Okay. Okay. How am I doing for time? Oh, a little bit more time. So berries and brambles, there's a lot of plants that'll do fairly well with a little bit of shade. So we'll just look briefly at brambles, currants and gooseberries, and elderberries. So there are some native cane fruits, some native blackberries or raspberries. They're relatively easy to grow. We had a class last week about these. I think at some point that'll become a video eventually on our website as a resource to review in the future, but we want to give folks who signed up and took the class a chance first to view it. And if you time it correctly and you choose your cultivars and varieties correctly, there is a possibility for a full season of harvest. We do have some gnarly pests that can affect them as well, as if you listen to the previous presentation. The other issue is that many animals love the foliage, so they will take some protection. Deer will just come along and strip them bare of foliage and sometimes fruit, and certainly birds, like our lovely catbird, really enjoys picking these fruits off. Again, if there's something that you want to eat, there's certainly something else that wants to eat it too. So they're going to take some protection, but many hardy cultivars and lots of choices. There are also currants and gooseberries. This is a product that I think people are getting more and more interested in. We've sort of lost the taste in our country for currants and gooseberries, but there's lots of great recipes for tarts and jams and jellies and lots of things that people are just starting to get into a little bit more. They're small shrubs and they're tolerant of a wide array of conditions. So if you are not sure about what you've got and what will work, I'd say both raspberries, blackberries, and currants are a good way to start to see what will grow there. And there's a lot of different colors and varieties of them. Gooseberries are beautiful, almost look like a piece of a beautiful ornament or marble. You can almost translucent skin that you can see through. They are not prohibited. That was something that we hear again. Oh no, you're not allowed to grow those. So there was a problem with them. But now they are back on the market. If you're going to grow black currants, choose those varieties that are disease resistant. But these are a great option. My issue with them in my woodlot is that I see them coming. They look beautiful. And then I hear the catbirds, and somehow the catbirds get to them in a day. So again, you're going to need some kind of bird netting to protect these because they are delightful and delicious. So the same with the elderberries. Important to note with elderberries that every part of the plant is poisonous except for the berries and the flowers. So there's liqueurs and flavored foods that use the elderberry flowers because they have a beautiful light and floral essence to them. And the berries themselves can be kind of tart, but as a juice, they're really nutritious, just like the currants, which I didn't mention before. Great nutrition in those. Same with the elderberries. But again, you have to fight the birds for them sometimes. They're interested in them too. They do best in light shade. And if you've got a wet area, this might be a really good option for you. So if you have a wet forest floor, this is a plant you might consider growing as well. There are lots of nice native ones. There's also cultivated and chosen varieties that are heavier producers, but really a lovely plant as well in flower, quite beautiful. And then just briefly, we'll look at some food from trees. So trees grow high, so management is the key in order to be able to harvest the fruit rather than having it fall to the forest floor. And that is not always easy. So we'll look quickly, and this is really a glancing blow. There are varieties of pawpaws out there that are cultivated varieties. You can also get seed, but it's great to start with cultivated varieties if you can. The issue with pawpaws is you do need to have a number of individuals, just actually with both of them, get a number of individuals to create with pawpaws and persimmons the opportunity for good pollination. They do prefer light shade with a damp, rich soil. If you've got they will grow in full sun too, but then you really need to have rich soils and damp situation. But one of the fun things about them is that the deer don't seem to bother them. So they're really deer resistant. It's a pro and a con. Some people say that they are becoming an issue in areas with high deer population where they just become a colony of pawpaw that is sort of dominating the tree canopy. That's beyond the scope of our presentation today, but they do have a wonderful fruit. These are grown by a local grower here in Putnam. They're sort of custardy, banana-y. They don't travel very well. They bruise really easily. And that might have been one of the reasons that they were not such a popular fruit, but boy, are they tasty. And they make a superb ice cream. So marketing these would be tricky. You have to get them to market, somebody who knows what to do with them, or wants to purchase them, or build a market around them, or create a product that is using them that you have control over. So a value-added product like pawpaw ice cream. It's pretty awesome. And then persimmons. This is a fruit that is native, like the pawpaw before it. Both are native, both are tree fruits. With persimmons, it's ideal to manage it as a bushy shrub. They are pretty vigorous growers though. So myself, I am struggling to keep them anywhere near where I can harvest anything from them. So they can be quite tall and they're very robust, fast growers. But great fruit, again, not something that we all have a taste for. They have to be super ripe before you eat them, or they have a really terrible effect on your mouth. It feels like your mouth is coated with cotton fiber. So got to wait till they're ripe and then do something with them again. So really ripe fruit can also be really mushy to transport. So you find a product that you can make with them. There's a Virginia winemaker who makes a really cool liqueur in the fall using persimmon. So think about what you can do. They're great fresh eating too, but it's hard to transport things that are super, super ripe. And then lastly, I think for today, we're going to look at hazelnuts. Hazelnuts are a wonderful small shrubby plant. One of the nice things about all of these shrubbier plants is that they can create really lovely habitat for birds as well as pollinators. A lot of those pollinators also happen to be caterpillars who want to eat some of the foliage, and that's okay. So if you're planting enough of them, there should be enough foliage for you and the caterpillars. The problem with hazelnuts is that you frequently have poaching from squirrels. They really would like them too. So you don't even know the fruit's in there sometimes because their fruit is covered with a kind of a papery leafy covering that disguises them from human eyes, apparently, but not so much from little squirrel paws. But great plant to grow. It's important to get a disease-resistant variety with these because there are some canker diseases that can really lay waste to the shrubs very quickly. So try to find a disease-resistant varieties if you want to plant these. If your focus is to create an ecosystem based around your food growing, then you might want to consider our native hazelnuts. But again, they might be a little more disease susceptible, and that's just something that you can decide what you can live with. So I mentioned that there are so many resources to get you started. It depends on how much time we have today, but there are a load of great websites that you can view. And I think, Jess, you're going to go over some of these resources. And then we are going to have a jointly offered upcoming program, which is a log-grown shiitake inoculation workshop. So you could see that process if you're interested in doing it. But today I just did want to give you, let me just check what's in the questions. I did want to give you just a light a pass over, just to kind of just see what it is that we talk about when we're talking about agroforestry. So I'm just going to go back to the questions. Better now or wait till after Jess, Ruby? What would you prefer? Or do you want Jess and I to handle them at the end?
I would say tackle the ones that would make sense for you to tackle now.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, good. I saw the available grants. Maybe Jess can talk a little bit about some of the things that are available through WAC. I'm curious how to assess whether a woodland is a good fit. We touched on that a little bit, and it is going to be based on each of the plant requirements. So a bit of reading, but then it's also going to be trial and error, which can be expensive. For types of production, best land for mushroom cultivation. I used to say it was X, but I've seen people cultivate mushrooms in just about anywhere because they want to make it work. It's but what is easiest. So for mushroom cultivation, we generally say some kind of canopy of shade. It could be a physical canopy that you create. It could be a tree canopy, evergreen or deciduous. And that just so that we're not getting the logs in full sun. And then access to water, of running water or a solar pump or some way to get water there is really important for two reasons: to keep your mushroom logs moist, but also when you want to shock them so that you would get them to fruit all at once, having water is important. So for mushrooms, pretty easy. Because you can almost create those conditions. Harder for things like ginseng and some of the plants that we talked about, because they have very specific native habitats. So look at there's some organizations like USDA has a plant atlas that kind of tells you what the needs of that plant are. The same with the Ladybird Wildflower Center in Texas, what the plant needs are, where you should try to grow and where they grow naturally. So you could make a study of what they need. Other people have made that study already, but it's like that's part of your journey, is to figure out what works best. So for forests, okay, agroforestry for livestock producers. I don't have a lot of information myself on silvipasturing. It's outside. If that's what you're thinking of, it might not be silvipasture, but we could probably turn you to some resources on there. O'Connor, that's your question. Extent and diversity of agroforestry production in New York and grants for small growers, right? That's great. I don't know the extent and diversity of agroforestry production. I'm just here in Putnam County. I just know my little neck of the woods. So anything else? Lightly wooded acre, mostly oaks, lots of invasive vines. Thank you. I'm so glad you asked that question. Invasive material is going to add, oh, hi, Jamie. Sorry, I just saw that's who asked that question. So invasive is really tough to work with, but not impossible to work because sometimes they also provide some habitat for things that are that need some more structure or for shade and protection. But the vines, depending on which one you have, we could look at them specifically on how you would control them. Some difficult ones would be some of the invasives that sometimes people say it's an invasive, but it's also just our native, some of our native foliage plants that grow and they're native, but they do become kind of invasive because they are just happy where they are. So I would try to create what we did with our plot was try to create at least at first one bastion that is free of invasive vines and start there. We've been working our way outward, cutting down or using a grub to pull out the root systems of some of the vines and some of the barberry to just create a little bit at a time and then expand from there is what I would suggest, because if you try to do it all at once, it's just overwhelming. And if you think also then that you're going to be fencing it, start small, do a chunk of it, fence a chunk of it, and then yearly add some more. Because if you can't get those invasives suppressed, most likely they're going to take over or outcompete your tree seedlings or your shrubs or your herbaceous plants that you got on the forest floor. Yeah, I'll share you some of the articles about that Bob has written about ginseng production. Many of the articles are contained in one book that kind of got put together, so we can share a link for that. Oh yeah, definitely. Lauren asks if there's already some of these species on the land, should you keep some distance from the wild simulated plot and the wild population? That's a really good question. And in some cases, it was ginseng growers, for example, when they collect, people who are collectors would not want to introduce any non-local ecotype to a place where they're already growing. So Lauren, the perfect world would be if, say, there's a plant already growing there, that's the one you continue to cultivate. That would be, from my naturalist point of view, that would be my happy place, that you would take the seeds from those and try to cultivate them. Or if it's propagating through asexual means, divisions, that sort of thing, that you're then keeping that local ecotype right there, not introducing something else. It depends on your goals. If you're a grower, you might need to be making a lot more than that. Oh, thanks, Ruby, for adding that. And the silvopasture, thanks. Yes, there's a great article and there's great resources about silvopasturing on the Cornell Small Farms program. How much more time do we have? We have one about Oriental bittersweet and grapes. Are there any products, crop uses for the grapes from these wild vines? Oh yeah, some of them are fantastic eating, and some of them are great, great winemaking, jelly making. Ruby, do you use any of the wild grapes for jelly? They're so flavorful. But not the bittersweet. There's nothing yummy to make with bittersweet as far as I know. And there's a lot of native grapes too, so it's really hard to separate.
Okay, I think if you stop sharing your screen, Jen, we'll hop over to Jess for some more resources. Thank you for all of that. And thank you everybody for all those questions. Feel free to just keep popping them in and we'll get to them when it makes sense. Ready, Jess? Great.
Yeah, already. Okay, everyone can hear me, see my screen, all that good stuff.
Looks great. You're all good.
Awesome. So hello, everyone. My name is Jessica Alba. I am the Watershed Forest Stewardship Educator at the Watershed Agriculture Council. And just like Ruby and Jen have mentioned, I'm going to be talking a little bit about the resources that are available to landowners. Specifically, I'll talk about programs that my organization offers, but I'll also touch on some state-run programs and Cornell-run programs. And these are mostly to give financial and educational support to forest landowners for a variety of different reasons. And we'll kind of tie it all into agroforestry and forest farming. So some background info on what the Watershed Agricultural Council is. Watershed Agricultural Council, or WAC, WAC, is a nonprofit. We are non-governmental. We're funded mostly through government sources, though, such as the New York City Department of Environmental Protection, the U.S. Forest Service, and the USDA. And the reason that we have reason that we have government funding sources is because we serve as a bit of a bridge between policy and people. So we work in very specific areas, these green regions on this map. So here's the Hudson River, here's New York City, here's the Croton watershed where we are. If you zoom in, you'll see Putnam County. The eastern half of Putnam County is in this section right here. And then if we zoom back out, you'll see the Catskill Mountains up here. These areas of land collect rainwater and snow and drain that water down into New York City's drinking water reservoirs, these darker blue zones. So the land around these reservoirs is really important to New York City because what happens on the land is affecting water quality for the 10 million water consumers downstream. So the city sends money back north in order to help protect the land. And WAC works with landowners to manage their property to maintain high water quality, which has an added benefit of also typically producing good habitat for wildlife and economic benefits to the people in the area. So WAC's mission is to promote economic viability of agriculture and forestry, to protect water quality, and to conserve working landscapes. And we do this through 4 main program areas. The first is forestry, which is the program area that I work out of. I'll touch on our forest programs, but essentially it's to maintain and to steward and to manage forested landscapes. Our biggest program area is agriculture. That happens a lot up in the Catskills with dairy farms, and then a bit down here a lot with horse farms. And that's to help farmers manage crops in the off season and a lot of manure management, preventing excess nutrients from making their way into the water. We also have an economic viability program. So if you've ever seen this Pure Catskills logo, that's a way that we promote locally sourced and grown forest and farm products. So it's one of our initiatives to really help people make owning their land financially viable. And then we also have conservation easements, which I'll touch on a little bit later, but it's another way of conserving property. So why do we have a forestry program when we're concerned about water, right? So we want to see healthy forested landscapes because they act as the best natural filter for water. So we've got kind of two examples right here. What we want to see is what's on the right. So we want you guys to be emotionally invested into your woods. We want you to feel confident in managing them and growing things in them like forest crops. We want wildlife habitat. We can see like on the stream side here, there's a lot of opportunities for animals to hide and to find food. And you've got roots growing into the soil, soaking up pollution maybe from septic tanks. And got a stark contrast to the left side of the picture where we're missing all that, where we don't have a forested riparian zone. Riparian zone meaning the area on a stream bank, so stream side basically. And we want this forest here because we want the landscape to act as a green filter and not like a gray funnel. So we want a really big difference between the pervious surfaces and the impervious surfaces. Impervious surfaces like pavement, like concrete, like buildings, the water can't absorb, it can't filter, it can't collect anywhere. It just runs off in sheets over the land and can cause flooding and erosion and carry pollution. We don't want that. We want happy, healthy forests that are doing the exact opposite of that process. So the forestry program does this through a few different specific initiatives, and we focus a lot on implementing good forestry practices while providing outreach and education opportunities. This can be through intensive, heavy forest management like timber harvests, but like Jen said, this presentation is not really getting into that too much. Or it can be through kind of the opposite, tree planting with school groups and with local communities and getting people to understand how their forests impact water quality. So the first program that we coordinate, I want to talk about is the Management Assistance Program, also known as MAP. It's a grant that's funded on a cost share and a reimbursement basis. You'll find that's a common theme throughout most of the grants that I talk about. Typically grants to individuals, to private citizens work on a cost share reimbursement basis. So costs are accrued by the landowner and then paid back once the work has been completed. We can award up to $3,000 per application for this, or $6,000 a year. And the activities that can qualify for this funding are all listed here. So tree planting and riparian improvement, getting more trees on your property, invasive plant control, like here we've got barberry that's coming out of the woods. That's a big one. I would say that most of the time we fund landowners in this region, it's to control invasive plants. And vine cutting is included in this. So I know one of the questions was about oriental bittersweet and vines on trees. If you're within those green blobs that I showed at the beginning on the map, that watershed region, you can qualify for this funding, and that could include to cut vines on your property. Also have timber stand improvement, which is timber harvesting related, wildlife improvement, so things like pruning apple trees so that they grow more vigorously and more healthy to produce more fruit. Forested crop, but also beneficial to wildlife because it provides a food source for them. That's something you can be reimbursed for through MAP. And you can also qualify for free forester site visits where myself or a colleague would come and walk your woods with you and just let you know what our thoughts are if you're not really sure where to start or what to do. The second program I want to mention is Trees for Tribs, where we provide free native trees and shrubs for planting along riparian zones, because we want to convert something that looks like this into something that looks and functions a little bit more like a healthy riparian zone where you've got a nice vegetated buffer and you've got pollution being absorbed by plants and you're preventing erosion and you're keeping a healthier stream side. So here's a practical example of what this looks like. This is on Palmer Lake, which is in Putnam County. We planted a row of trees and a few shrubs right on the water's edge here, and then we're going to be adding on this year and planting some more trees just to beef up that riparian zone and increase the water quality and the habitat of that space. Best management practices, also known as BMP, is another one of our cost share reimbursement grants. It's targeted towards loggers, but it can also work for landowners. This picture of a culvert right here was one that a landowner sent in and was reimbursed for, not a logger. So there is flexibility there, but it focuses on forested roads. So if you've got a farm, if you've got a big tract of forest land and you've got roads leading through the woods, and you notice that after big rainstorms, you have something that looks a little bit like the picture on the left, where it's very muddy, very rutted. You've got water flowing long distances, you've got sediment moving, and you don't really want to see that anymore. We will pay for you to install what are known as BMPs, which are water diversion devices. So things like water bars, which kind of just channel water back into the forest, or culverts, which we're maybe a little bit more familiar with to help channel water, again, in more desired directions. BMPs are just ways to get water off of loose dirt and back into the trees where they can be absorbed and filtered instead of having just log flumes of muddy water flowing downhill into reservoirs. So if you've got big forested roads, this could be very appealing to you. I want to mention my Woodlot, which is our education and outreach website. It's a catalog and a library of free activity ideas, advice for landowners, ways to connect with other landowners and with other folks in your community. We've got that library of content broken down into interest areas and goals. And you can see an example of some of these interest areas here. I'll touch on these when I show the website in a little bit. But there's just lots of free resources available. It's targeted, of course, to landowners in our region, but really anyone who owns forest property could benefit from just perusing through this website. And like I said, I'll kind of run us through it in just a minute, but I wanted to get it out there. And then conservation easements, I mentioned I would touch on before. So for those who aren't aware of how they function, it's a voluntary and legal agreement that permanently limits the use of the land to protect some conservation values. So WAC is a land trust in one of our functions. We protect about 30,000 acres of land throughout the watershed. Tilly Foster Farm in Putnam County has a conservation easement with us. And the way that it works is that you either sell or donate certain rights to use your property, and you retain other rights. So in our case, we want people to maintain the right to harvest timber, to grow forest crops, and to farm their land. But owning land is really expensive in New York, and there's a lot of pressure to sell that land. And if you sell that land could be developed. And developed land almost never goes back to its original land use context, which means that you would be permanently losing that farm or that forest. So we don't want that to happen to the landowners we work with. We want them to be able to keep their land in perpetuity. And the conservation easement allows them to do that. It reduces their taxes a little bit, and it also conserves the land forever. So if you sell your land, if your land is inherited to someone that you've left it to after you pass on, they can't turn around and be like, well, I'm developing it, and they can't sell it because that conservation easement stays with the property. So if you're worried about losing your land, this is a great way to permanently kind of not have to think about that loss anymore. Pretty much any land trust that you speak to could help you with this process if you're interested. And then another way to reduce your taxes would be to apply for the forest tax law in New York State called 480A. So this tax law is statewide, which means that it applies to those outside of the watershed region I showed in the map. If you have more than 50 contiguous forested acres, you can apply to reduce up to 80% of your property taxes, which is massive if you own a piece of land that large. You do have to manage your forest in order to qualify for this, which means that you have to have it in your plan at some point to harvest timber. To harvest timber, you need what's called a forest management plan. It's a document that is drafted by a professional forester. And in order to have a professional forester write that document, you need to hire them. So there is some upfront cost associated with getting into this tax law. And of course, it's a long-term investment that would pan out for you. But we also help cover the cost of updating or applying for this tax law. So it can make it an even better investment up front. If you've got watershed property and you're interested in this, we can help reduce some of those costs of writing the management plan. And then speaking of the DEC, I just wanted to mention a couple of their programs that could also be of interest to folks. Trees for Tribs is one that I talked about. I coordinate that for our region, but it is run statewide. Buffer in a Bag does something similar. It provides free native plants for riparian restoration. And then Regenerate New York functions in much the same way that MAP does, in that it's a cost share reimbursement grant for good forest stewardship. But they can provide much more funding than we can. You know, the state is a much bigger entity than WAC is, and they can give you up to $50,000 per application, depending on what kind of practice you want to do in your woods. So let's say you've got like 7 acres and you want to thin the trees on those 7 acres to let in more light, to diversify your habitat. You're not going to get a logger to come in and cut trees for 7 acres because they're not going to make a return on their efforts there. So then the alternative is either cutting it yourself or hiring someone, which would be very expensive. So these funds could go to hiring someone to do that. And then you can use those cut logs to grow shiitakes from, or to turn into sawdust for other kinds of mushrooms. So you can really kind of get a good bang for your buck with this Regenerate New York program. There's one landowner I worked with, she used funds from this to put up deer exclosures on her property, which was something she was going to do anyways, but then she was able to get extra money from the state just to beef up her exclosures and actually add more, which is great because Jen mentioned if you're growing forest crops, you're going to have something else that wants to eat those plants. So like ginseng, for example, on the forest floor can be very vulnerable to other critters coming along and nibbling it. Exclosures can help prevent that loss from wildlife eating all of your forest crops. And then one of the last programs I wanted to mention was from Cornell Cooperative Extension. So not run by the state, but run throughout the state. There's something called the Master Forest Owner Program. Master forest owners are volunteer landowners who own forest property and then receive additional training from Cornell Cooperative Extension on things like ecology, timber harvesting, wildlife, just sort of stuff that you want to know if you're owning large forest lands. Those volunteers are trained, and then on an as-needed basis, they are sent out to landowners who reach out to Cornell and say, hey, I'd like a master forest owner to come visit my property. The master forest owner will go over and walk their woods in them and just do a site visit and help them brainstorm and point them in the direction of resources that help the landowner to achieve their goals. So this is great if you're just starting out and you really don't know what to do because it's free, so there's no investment. And then also the master forest owners are not professional loggers or arborists or foresters. They're not with the government, right? They have no financial investment in you like buying a product from them. So they can really just talk with you about what they think is going on in your woods and what they recommend and what their own experiences have been as a forest owner. So it's a really low pressure way of just learning, like, what are your opportunities? You know, do you have space where you can grow ginseng, where you can grow the currants that you want, where you can, you know, harvest some trees for shiitake logs, and you can ask for a landowner, for a master forest owner specifically, who has experience with that. And they can really just talk to you one-on-one about how that looks in a practical sort of way. So I wanted to throw up just the main groups that I mentioned, my contact info as well. Shane Stevens is the Master Forest Owner Regional Director for our region, so Lower Hudson Valley. If you want to write down my email or his email for the names of some of these other program areas, just to reach back out to them. I'll leave this up for just a second. And then I will go ahead and switch my screen share over to my Woodlot so I can show you how that website functions.
Also, as you do that, I've dropped a ton of the links that you mentioned in the chat.
Awesome, thank you.
Those are right for people to click on.
Okay, so everyone should be looking at my Woodlot right now. This is the landing page. I'm going to go through just the tabs up top really quickly and just mention kind of how to use this site as a resource to you. So when you first land here, mywoodlot.com, I see the option to log out because I'm already logged in. You would see the option to log in or to register, so you can save activities. You can participate in our discussions, which is our forum. So you can ask questions or answer other landowners' questions, talk to other My Woodlot users on the discussion page. And then we also have an events calendar. So if I click on here, I'll show you, you've got list view. I like calendar view personally. And there's just tons of stuff going on in our region. I reach out to nature centers, to land trusts, to county properties, and I collect what they're working on and what they're presenting with, you know, every month, 1 month at a time. And then we list them all here. So if you're interested in in-person events and workshops or things to do with your family, guided hikes, things like that, there's tons of opportunities. So for example, today's talk, Agroforestry Exploration, is up there. So if you weren't aware of it going on today, you could check out the calendar and find it that way. So highly recommend if you're bored and you're looking for something to do locally, there's tons of stuff happening. I'm always amazed whenever I fill out the events calendar about what's going on in our region. You can also check out the I'm interested in tab. I'll go back to the homepage to show this. So you can check out the interest areas just by starting up here and scrolling through them. Or if you scroll through, we've got some new content on the website, and then you can see these bigger kind of blocks of interest areas here. So to show you what they look like, I'm going to go into the interest area income. I'm interested in making money on my woods. And then it takes you to goals you can toggle through. So I want to learn, can I harvest my trees? What do I need to know? Or in our case, discover woodland farming options. And then I find all these resources here about learning how to farm shiitake mushrooms, silvopasturing. I know some folks were asking about incorporating livestock into woodlands, how to farm the woods, how to grow ramps, how to grow pawpaws, ginseng, tons of things up there that are honestly a lot of Cornell Cooperative Extension resources that we've just cataloged into one place. So that's one way that you can use the website, is to figure out what is it that you're curious about and click on that and kind of work your way through that way. And I also want to show on our resources tab, we have a mapping tool. So if you're curious, if you're in the watershed, if your property is in the watershed, you want to know if you qualify for our reimbursement grants, you put your address into this bar on the top left, and then it would just show you in the boundaries, if you're in or out. Answer that question quickly. And then the directory is something that I think a lot of folks could be interested in, where we have professionals in the forestry world that we work with and we recommend. These folks have gone through extra training with us, like watershed qualified foresters and certified loggers. You can also find tree service providers and arborists, firewood providers. You can get our contact info as my Woodlot team members if you're interested in reaching out to us directly. So if you're like, how am I supposed to know who to hire for any of these things? I recommend toggling through the directory. The last thing I want to show you on my Woodlot is down here in Connect. We have a section called Women Owning Woods. This is a new initiative. We have a Women Owning Woods, or WOW group, throughout the Catskills and the Hudson Valley region. It's a group of natural resource professionals and women landowners. We get together to foster learning experiences, to do virtual and in-person workshops. We've got one coming up in March about growing shiitake logs at Tilly Foster Farm. So you can learn about WOW here. You can find our Facebook page, read about other WOW resources. It's kind of becoming a new big thing. There's a lot of WOW groups popping up all over the country. So if you're a female landowner who wants to connect with others, highly recommend checking out this spot. And then the last website I wanted to mention is the New York Master Forest Owner Program. So this is the Cornell group of trained landowner volunteers. If you're interested in requesting a site visit to your woodlot, you can do so on their website. You can learn more about MFOs, read about their publications, Forest Connect, and just kind of get a general sense of how the program functions here on their main webpage. So with that, I think I'm going to stop sharing my screen. Happy to answer any questions that there might be, and hand things back over, to you, Ruby.
Wonderful, thank you. I think Brian popped a question for you in the chat.
Sure, I'll take a look. All right, Brian, I'm reading through your chat right now. Yeah, so funding stream projects for riparian zones. You're in luck because there's a lot of different opportunities for that. Depending on where your property is, you can head to the mapping tool on my Woodlot. If it's within that boundary, the Croton watershed or the Catskill watershed boundary, you can apply 2 different ways to get free trees from us, through MAP or through Trees for Tribs. We provide the trees, we provide the protection materials, so things like tree tubes to prevent deer from eating them. We help you plant the trees, and we help you to maintain them. So we see really good long-term success that way. If you're outside of the watershed boundary, you can still apply for Trees for Tribs through New York State. I can hand you the contact info for that. You can also do buffer in a bag, which is where you contact New York State and they send you a bag full of tree seedlings from the Saratoga Tree Nursery, and they ship it out to you, and you plant those in the ground kind of on your own time. I think that's a little bit more kind of luck of the draw in that I don't think you get to select the plants that come to you that way, but you do get them for free. So there's definitely a few different big options for creating a forested riparian zone. Columbia County, perfect. So you are outside of the watershed, but you can still, I think, qualify for Trees for Tribs with New York State and buffer in a bag. And so I can send those links to Ruby, and maybe in a follow-up email to participants, you can hand those out. Yep. And I'll just highlight, what's good for what region so that you guys are all aware.
That would be great. Thank you so much, Jessica. And thank you, Jen. Before we